Richard Blackwood stared through his penthouse window at the Manhattan skyline, a glass of scotch untouched in his hand. Another sleepless night, another anniversary approaching. 20 years had passed since the accident that took his daughter Emma away, yet the pain remained as fresh as yesterday. His phone buzzed, another reminder from his assistant about today's important merger meeting. At 62, Richard had built Blackwood Enterprises into a billion-dollar empire, but success felt hollow without family to share it with. His wife Sarah hadn't survived the loss of their daughter, passing away from grief 5 years after the accident. "Mr. Blackwood, your car is ready," his butler announced. Richard nodded, straightening his Italian suit. Since his regular chauffeur was ill, the service had sent a replacement. He hated changes to his routine, but the merger was too crucial to miss. Outside, a young woman in a crisp uniform stood beside the black Mercedes. Something about her stance made Richard pause, a familiar grace he couldn't quite place. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood. I'm Catherine Hayes, your driver for today." Richard froze. Hayes. The name hit him like a physical blow. Emma Hayes Blackwood, his daughter's full name. But it couldn't be. Hayes was a common surname, he told himself. Still, his hands trembled as he got into the car. Through the rearview mirror, he studied Catherine's profile. She was around 30, with warm brown eyes that crinkled when she smiled, just like Emma's had. Her careful, precise driving style reminded him of how Emma used to practice in their driveway, determined to be perfect at everything she attempted. "How long have you been driving, Ms. Hayes?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. 10 years, sir. Started right after college. It helps pay the bills while I work on my art." Richard's heart skipped a beat. Emma had been an artist too, her paintings still hanging in his penthouse, preserved like precious artifacts. "Your parents must worry about you driving in the city," he probed gently. Catherine's eyes met his in the mirror, a flash of sadness crossing her face. "I never knew my parents, sir. I grew up in foster care. The Hayes name came from my first foster family." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Richard gripped the leather seat, his mind racing. Emma had been 3 months pregnant when the accident happened. The doctors had focused on saving her, but in those chaotic hours... "Where?" His voice cracked. "Where did you grow up?" "St. Mary's Home for Children in Connecticut until I was 5, then various foster homes. St. Mary's, the same hospital where Emma had been taken after the accident." Richard's vision blurred as pieces began falling into place. Could it be possible? Had his granddaughter survived that terrible night? The car stopped at a red light, and Catherine turned slightly, concern evident in her expression. "Are you feeling all right, Mr. Blackwood? You look pale." "Ms. Hayes," he managed, "would you mind making a detour? There's something I need to show you." She hesitated. "Sir, your meeting. I'll double your day rate. This is important." Catherine nodded, and Richard directed her to his penthouse building. In his private gallery, Emma's paintings covered the walls, landscapes, portraits, and abstract pieces bursting with color and life. As Catherine stepped into the room, her sharp intake of breath was audible. She moved toward one particular painting, her hand reaching out but stopping short of touching the canvas. "This technique," she whispered. "I paint exactly like this. I've never seen anyone else use colors this way." Richard pulled out his phone, hands shaking as he opened his photo gallery. He found the picture he was looking for. Emma, at 22, standing proudly beside her latest painting. Her smile, her eyes, her graceful stance, all mirrored in the young woman standing before him. "Catherine," he said softly, "I need to tell you about your mother." Catherine stared at the photograph, her knees weakening. She sank into a nearby chair, eyes fixed on the smiling young woman who could have been her twin. Her name was Emma Hayes Blackwood, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. She was my daughter. 20 years ago, she was in a car accident. She was 3 months pregnant at the time. No, Catherine whispered, shaking her head. This can't be. The doctors focused on saving Emma, Richard continued. In the chaos, we were told the baby hadn't survived. Emma passed away 2 days later. But you... He knelt beside her chair, studying her face. You have her eyes, her smile, even the way she held a steering wheel. Catherine's hands trembled as she looked between the photo and the paintings. Her entire life, she'd wondered about her origins, about the artistic talent that seemed to come from nowhere. Now, surrounded by artwork that mirrored her own style, the truth felt overwhelming. I need proof, she said firmly, her professional composure returning. I can't just accept this on faith. Richard nodded, respecting her pragmatism. Of course, I'll arrange for DNA testing immediately, but look at this. He pulled out another photo. Emma at age 20. The resemblance was undeniable. All my life, Catherine said softly, I wondered why I was left at St. Mary's. I imagined my parents didn't want me, that I wasn't good enough. Her voice broke. Your mother wanted you more than anything, Richard assured her. She was so excited about becoming a mother. She'd already started painting the nursery. A tear rolled down Catherine's cheek. Why didn't anyone look for me? How did this happen? Richard's face darkened with guilt and grief. In those days, after the accident, I was lost in my own pain. When they told me the baby hadn't survived, I didn't question it. I failed you both. Catherine stood abruptly, pacing the room. Her training as a professional driver had taught her to stay calm in crisis, but this was beyond anything she'd prepared for. I have a shift to complete, she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. I need time to process this. Of course, Richard replied, understanding her need for space. But please, let me arrange the DNA test. And Catherine ... He pulled out his business card. Call me anytime, day or night. Back in the car, the drive to Richard's meeting passed in tense silence. Catherine's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her mind racing. Richard watched her, seeing Emma in every movement, his heart aching with newfound hope and old regret. At the office building, Catherine stopped the car but didn't turn around. I'll call, she said quietly, but I need time. Richard nodded, fighting the urge to embrace her. Take all the time you need. I've waited 20 years without knowing you existed. I can wait a little longer to know you properly. As he watched her drive away, Richard pulled out his phone and cancelled all appointments for the next week. He had preparations to make, records to find, and most importantly, a granddaughter to get to know. In her small apartment that evening, Catherine sat surrounded by her paintings. She'd always been drawn to landscapes, especially mountains at sunset, just like the ones hanging in Richard's gallery. Her whole life, she'd felt like she was searching for something without knowing what it was. Her phone buzzed, a text from Richard. DNA test arranged for tomorrow morning if you're ready. No pressure, just know that whether you choose to be part of my life or not, you were never unwanted. You were loved from the moment your mother knew about you. Catherine stared at the message, tears blurring her vision. 20 years of questions, of feeling abandoned, of wondering why she painted the way she did. Everything was about to change. She picked up her brush, doing what she always did when overwhelmed. She began to paint. As colors flowed onto the canvas, she realized she was recreating one of Emma's pieces from memory. Like mother, like daughter. Taking a deep breath, she texted back one word. Tomorrow. The DNA results arrived a week later, confirming what their hearts already knew. Catherine was indeed Emma's daughter, Richard's granddaughter. The hospital records revealed a tragic mix-up during the chaos of that terrible night. A clerical error that had separated a family for 20 years. In Richard's penthouse, Catherine sat examining old family photos while Richard watched, memorizing every detail of his granddaughter's face. "Tell me about her," Catherine said softly. "My mother. What was she really like?" Richard smiled, pulling out a worn sketchbook. "Emma carried this everywhere. Like you, she couldn't go a day without creating something." He handed it to Catherine, who opened it with trembling hands. The pages were filled with sketches, dreams, ideas, and plans for the future. On one page, Catherine found a half-finished drawing of a baby's nursery, her nursery. Tears spilled onto the page before she could stop them. "She was stubborn," Richard continued, his voice warm with memories. "When she decided to pursue art instead of business, nothing could change her mind. I was angry at first. I wanted her to take over the company. Now I realize she was right. Life is too short not to follow your heart." Catherine traced her mother's signature on the last sketch. Did she suffer in the accident?" Richard's face darkened. "The doctors said she wasn't in pain. She held on for 2 days, as if she was fighting to stay for something. Now I wonder if somehow she knew about you." Standing abruptly, Catherine walked to the window. "I grew up thinking I wasn't wanted, that my parents had thrown me away. All this time—" Her voice broke. Richard joined her at the window. "Catherine, if I had known, if I had any idea you were out there—" "I know," she said quietly. "You would have searched for me, but we can't change the past." A determined look crossed Richard's face. "No, but we can make up for lost time. Catherine, I want you to move in here. There's more than enough space and—" "I can't," she interrupted. "This is all too much. I have my own life, my apartment, my job." "At least let me help you set up a proper art studio," Richard pleaded. "Your mother would have wanted that. The company's merger can wait. Nothing is more important than family." Catherine turned to face him. "That's just it. We're not really family yet. We're strangers connected by DNA and tragedy. We need time to become family." Richard nodded, respecting her wisdom. "You're right, of course. You're as practical as your grandmother was." His eyes misted over. "Sarah would have loved you so much." "Tell me about her," Catherine asked, returning to her seat. As Richard shared stories about his late wife, Catherine felt pieces of herself clicking into place. Her own mannerisms, habits, and talents suddenly made sense. They were inherited, passed down through a family she never knew she had. Later that evening, Richard showed her Emma's old studio, untouched since the accident. Easels stood waiting, paint tubes had long since dried, and half-finished canvases captured moments frozen in time. "This should be yours now," Richard said. "Emma would want you to have it." Catherine ran her fingers over her mother's brushes, feeling a connection that transcended time and loss. Maybe I could use it sometimes. When I visit?" Richard's face lit up at the word visit. It wasn't moving in, but it was a start. "I'd like that very much." As Catherine prepared to leave, Richard handed her a small box. These belonged to Emma, her favorite brushes, her sketchbooks, and— He paused, pulling out a delicate silver locket. This was her most treasured possession. Inside is a picture of her parents, your grandparents. She wore it every day. Catherine accepted the locket with trembling hands, opening it to find a young Richard and Sarah smiling back at her. Without a word, she put it on, the weight of it against her chest, feeling somehow right. "Thank you," she whispered, hugging him impulsively. Richard held her tight, finally allowing himself to cry. They stood there, grandfather and granddaughter, beginning to heal 2 decades of loss and separation. 3 months had passed since the revelation. Catherine gradually spent more time at the penthouse, painting in Emma's studio, learning about her family's history. Richard watched her artistic talent flourish, seeing Emma's spirit live on through her daughter's work. One evening, as Catherine cleaned her brushes, Richard entered the studio with an old document box. "I found something you should see," he said, placing it carefully on a clean table. "These are Emma's medical records from that time." Catherine's hands stilled. They hadn't discussed the accident details since that first day. "Are you sure we should?" "There's something specific," Richard explained, pulling out a yellowed envelope. "Emma wrote this letter when she learned she was pregnant. It was meant for you." Catherine's breath caught. A letter from her mother, written before everything went wrong. Her hands shook as she took the envelope. "My dearest baby," she read aloud, her voice trembling. "I don't know if you're a boy or girl yet, but I already love you more than I thought possible. Your father isn't in the picture, and that's okay. We'll have everything we need. Grandpa's furious I won't name him, but some secrets are better kept. You'll have me, and you'll have a family who loves you absolutely." Catherine paused, tears blurring the words. Richard placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "I'm painting your nursery with mountains and sunsets," the letter continued. "The same views that always brought me peace. I hope they'll watch over your dreams. I promise to fill your life with color and love. You're my masterpiece, little one. Love, Mom." Catherine clutched the letter to her chest, decades of questions about her father suddenly feeling less important. She had her mother's words, her mother's love, preserved in this precious piece of paper. "She'd be so proud of you," Richard said softly. "You became exactly the person she hoped you'd be. Strong, talented, independent." Looking around the studio, Catherine made a decision. "I'd like to have my first art show, here in this space, displaying my work alongside Mom's. A celebration of the talent she passed down to me." Richard's face lit up. "That's a wonderful idea. Emma always dreamed of having a proper gallery showing. This way, you can both have one." They spent the next few weeks preparing. Catherine selected her best pieces, carefully matching them with Emma's works that shared similar themes or techniques. The studio transformed into a gallery, mother and daughter's art, flowing together in perfect harmony. On opening night, the space filled with art critics, collectors, and family friends who'd known Emma. Many were struck by the uncanny similarities in style and technique between mother and daughter. "It's extraordinary," one critic commented. "The genetic transfer of artistic vision. It's as if Emma's spirit is painting through you." Catherine stood before her latest piece, a mountain sunset that mirrored one of Emma's favorites. "In a way, she is. Every time I paint, I feel her with me, teaching me, guiding my brush, sharing her vision of beauty." Richard watched his granddaughter speak with such confidence about her art, about Emma. The raw pain of their initial discovery had mellowed into something profound, a connection that transcended death itself. Later that evening, after the guests had left, Catherine found Richard sitting alone in front of Emma's self-portrait. "I never believed in genetic memory before," she said, joining him, "but seeing our work side by side, it's like I've known her my whole life, like she's been teaching me all along, even when I didn't know she existed." "She has been," Richard replied. "Every time you picked up a brush, every time you mixed colors in that particular way she loved, Emma was there. We just didn't realize it." Catherine squeezed his hand. "I've made a decision. I'm ready to move into the penthouse. Not because you want me to, but because I want to be closer to her, to you, to all of this." Richard's eyes filled with tears of joy. After 20 years of rattling around his empty home, surrounded by memories of loss, life was finally returning. His family was healing, growing, becoming whole again in ways he never expected. 1 year later, the penthouse buzzed with activity as Catherine prepared for her second major exhibition. Her first show had been a tremendous success, leading to commissions and recognition in the art world. But this exhibition was different, more personal. "Are you sure about this?" Richard asked, helping her hang a particular piece. Her interpretation of the accident that had taken her mother's life. "It's time," Catherine replied, adjusting the frame. "Mum's story, my story. Our story needs to be told." The exhibition, titled Lost and Found, A Daughter's Journey, chronicled Catherine's path from abandoned child to discovered heir. Each piece told part of the story: her years in foster care, her inherited talent-finding expression despite her circumstances, and finally, the miraculous reunion with her grandfather. The centerpiece was a diptych, two identical mountain sunsets painted 20 years apart, one by Emma, one by Catherine. Between them hung Emma's letter to her unborn child, its words now a testament to a love that had transcended death and time. On opening night, the gallery filled with art lovers, journalists and social workers Catherine had invited from various foster care organizations. She'd established a foundation in Emma's name, supporting arts education for foster children. "Every child deserves a chance to find their voice," Catherine addressed the crowd. "I found mine through art, just like my mother. Though I didn't know her, she gave me the greatest gift, a way to express myself, to find beauty in the world." Richard stood at the back, pride swelling in his heart. Catherine had transformed their shared tragedy into something meaningful, using her platform to help others while honoring Emma's memory. After the speeches, a young foster child approached Catherine. "Your paintings feel like home," the girl said shyly, "even the sad ones." Catherine knelt to the girl's level. "That's because they are about finding home, even when it takes a long time." She glanced at Richard, who was wiping away tears. "Sometimes family finds you when you least expect it." Later that night, Catherine and Richard sat in Emma's studio, now Catherine's, sharing a quiet moment. "I have something to show you," Catherine said, unveiling a canvas she'd kept hidden. It was a family portrait, Emma, Richard, Sarah, and Catherine herself, all together as they should have been. She'd painted it from photos, imagining the family gathering that never was. Richard stared at the painting, seeing 20 years of loss and longing transformed into an image of hope and healing. "It's perfect," he whispered. "We may have lost years together," Catherine said, "but look what we've found. Mom's still bringing us gifts through her art, through her love, through the talent she passed down." Richard hugged his granddaughter close. "Emma would be so proud of how you've handled everything. You've turned our family's greatest tragedy into something beautiful." "That's what artists do," Catherine smiled. "We take the broken pieces and make them into something new." As moonlight streamed through the studio windows, grandfather and granddaughter sat surrounded by 3 generations of art: Sarah's photographs, Emma's paintings, and Catherine's own works. Their family story hung on the walls, a testament to the power of love to transcend time, tragedy, and even death itself. The locket around Catherine's neck caught the light, reminding her of the connection that had always been there, waiting to be discovered. She was no longer the lost child, no longer the abandoned baby. She was Catherine Hayes Blackwood, daughter of Emma, granddaughter of Richard and Sarah, artist and heir to a legacy of love and talent that had finally found its way home. In the quiet of the studio, among the paintings that had brought them together, their family felt complete, not despite their losses, but because of them. Every brushstroke, every shared talent, every inherited gesture was a bridge across time, connecting them to Emma and to each other. And somewhere they both felt certain Emma was smiling.